Reading notes for today. So from today, Sunday, 14 January 2024. This is pages 36 to 45 for the book The Race of the Century, The Battle to Break the 4-Minute Mile by Neal Bascomb. This is the book. March 2022, first edition, hardcover. Publisher Scholastic Focus. Genre nonfiction, though not a biography. And this video is going to be a 10 pages per day reading notes video approach, which is what I have been doing as well. And yes, any notes about this format, since I was still in the realm of video fun, YouTube specific in terms of conceptualization, framing a hypothetical and then making the hypothetical closer to an actual return from a hypothetical 6-year break. I was saying doing 10 pages a day or 5 pages a day reading notes approach for all of the books I'd put on lists and lists videos for this channel. YouTube channel, Tanis Leonhardi. I'm Tanis Leonhardi. So, how am I feeling about the 10 pages? I chose the right book. There's enough stuff that I would say, like, some stuff's really dense and a bunch of ground is covered in 5 or 10 pages, and then it's like, well, 1 page, right, might be, which it would be going too far, especially if it's a really long book, but maybe going right for a different time or something. But it's good because it makes me move forward. But thus far, there's I would say some of the things that, like, might be like a little flare-up in terms of, like, let me address that flare-up. I would say 10 pages a day is actually great thus far. There are, like, little flare-ups that I'll encounter, and I'll be like, making a notes video is perfect because I can address that little flare-up, you know, kind of like, that kind of thing. So I'd say I'm content with it, at least at this point, or I could play around with it a little bit more. The video 1 for this book was 5 pages. I think 10 pages is... It's amazing how much I can take away from 10 pages. Like, this was the right book. It's meaty enough, fast moving enough that it just kind of works. Yeah. Okay. So that's the introduction. Notes on pages 36 to 38. So this is Roger Bannister finishes in the 1500 meters at the 1952 Summer Olympic Games. And he did the best of the 3 runners introduced with kind of a focus. He did the best at the edition of the Olympic Games of the 3 runners, and he placed 4th, which was really quite good for his country, Great Britain. And it did not sound like he was a sore loser, as portrayed here. Do I have anything else to note on that? Oh, the Duke of Edinburgh. This is Edinburgh is a city in Scotland in Great Britain, because Great Britain's an island, and in the United Kingdom, kind of thing. And yes, okay, it's pretty brief. So then the next set of pages was pages 39 to 45, and that introduces kind of the Olympic Games, ancient Olympic Games, the 1 mile run metric and or unit and how it's changed, and then kind of like 1 mile run times, and then it reintroduces the 3 runners that it's already introduced. John Landy, Roger Bannister, and Wes Santee in first name alphabetical order. Per me, I'm just relaying that here. It doesn't, I mean, it introduces the ancient Olympic Games, but it doesn't really. It makes a claim that they were treated like gods, but then doesn't actually provide that how. So I'm just kind of like, okay. Moving on. And then it talks about the 1 mile unit, which is like, so this person might not be privy to private collection kind of information and stuff, but it's pretty well known in certain communities that the 1 mile as it exists today was a British unit in origins, like British Isles, like ancient Britain and before. And some of those collections and artifacts have been made public, and they go back to like 11,000 BCE. Over 10,000 years older than the ancient Olympic Games, you know, kind of thing. And it was kind of like, depending on how well familiar you are with, like, sometimes there's a recipe that was developed 5,000 years ago, and people just want to make it out there. They're like, well, let's put it out there, but they don't necessarily want to bring up, like, the recipe was developed 5,000 years ago. So, like, we're just going to say it was invented, or when we bring it to market, so to speak, because the market name or whatever wasn't part of the original recipe, technically it's true that the product is new, even if the recipe was developed a long time ago. And most people, you know, would in today's world just be like, oh my gosh, it's ancient, oh my gosh, I gotta do this, and I gotta make all these YouTube videos about it, you know, kind of thing. How some people are just kind of like moth to a flame for stuff like that, so people go, we're just gonna leave that off. Right, so the 1 mile run is a bit like that, or the 1 mile unit specifically, where it started with the British, but then it kind of like got introduced through the Romans to society, and then was kind of standardized to return to the original British metric without kind of providing the attribution of this is where it comes from, because the British kind of let go of it for that purpose. All right, there's stuff like that that exists in the world, and the 1 mile unit is an example of that. The author, what the author writes is not inconsistent with that, but what the author does is it provides incomplete information about the history of the 1 mile unit. However, they might not have been privy to that information, especially if they were just looking online, looking for what's available about these runners and the race and all of this different stuff, which kind of how it comes across. It's like if I Google a bunch of this stuff, this is what came up like, you know, a decade ago. So I'm kind of like, maybe they just Googled, put this book together. I don't know. It comes across that way a little bit. I would hope there was additional research, but maybe not so much when it comes to like private collections of the 1 mile unit, which is not the focus of the author and not what they do. So I would not say the author is at fault in any way for that. They focus more on people kind of thing, and the people's perspective, or not the people's, but like people, like human-centric is a way of phrasing it. So yeah, and then it returns to the 3 runners introduced and was like, and they raced together in this one race, and yeah, so it's kind of it's not misinformation, it's incomplete information. And so, like, incomplete information is providing information, but it's not necessarily part of the whole story, which is why it's still classified as nonfiction, right? What's presented might be fact, but that doesn't, the reality of constructing a piece of writing, especially with a limit in space or however one wants limited, there's only so much that can be included, and especially when thinking about it's the race for a certain time, right? So providing a bunch of information about 1 mile, and especially if it's not already public information, right, it might not be the appropriate place to include that information in this kind of a book, right? It does talk a bit about the history of 1 mile run times, and that there was kind of like a perspective of, you know, the 5-minute mile, couldn't it be done, and then it was done. And I would say whenever there's, like, you know, a clock involved, you know, once 1 minute is broken, it's kind of like the logical thing, and the thing, whether it's logical or not, tends to be, so when's the 4-minute mile get broken? You know, like, there's a little bit of a logical, if one relies kind of exclusively on a clock with, like, a base of 1 minute, so to speak. There's called a natural progression of, so when's the next, you know, minute mark being broken, right? Kind of thing. So I would say it gets into the, you know, defining it as a pursuit and stuff, and I'm just kind of like, well, I mean, especially once the 5-minute was broken, right? It's kind of like the tone has been set. Who's going for the next one? Who's going for the next one? How fast can we go? You know, that kind of stuff. So I would say in that sense, it's from this runner's perspective, it's a non-unique and kind of unoriginal barrier to break. In a sense, it's a bit arbitrary. 1 minute is not defined in terms of humans, right? So I would say in terms of like actually setting that as a barrier to break, great. People love technology. We live in a world that, I'm filming this Sunday, 14 January 2004, tech's all the rage and stuff. The minute barrier, the 4-minute barrier, or currently like the 3-minute barrier, you know, like, it's great to define oneself, like, or one's goals relative to an external piece of technology and units used by the technology. But it would be, I think, from this runner's perspective and how I personally come up with target times, mine are defined in terms of me and what I can do. So there's a little bit in like reading this of kind of, well, it's the press, but I don't know if runners really thought about that. Like, is the minute mark the mark to beat? It's sure if you center yourself around technology developed by other people, but as a runner, like, wouldn't one want to be self-reliant and come up with one's own target times kind of thing? Or think of something even greater than either a tech metric or a personal metric, which would be a human metric, or a human target time. But that's not at all how the history of running as a sport has progressed to date, right? It's kind of more the arbitrary external, somebody developed this piece of technology or somebody developed this metric, so we have to just do the arbitrary thing compared to like humans. So I'd say that kind of stuff like is just kind of, yeah, that. So those are my notes. Do we have any, how are we on time? We're doing good. Notes on misinformation. An example of a piece of misinformation might be somebody lying about saying so-and-so has a wife, and naming the wife, but the wife is actually somebody else. Some people might do misinformation in the they would like to sleep with, or like sweet, sweet love to somebody. They say that and they know the other person has a soulmate or something like that, and they're like, oh, that person won't ever come after me, it's safe to do that. But in reality, they don't mean it, and the other person doesn't want it, so it's kind of harassment in that sense to the person they're saying it about, and that person's soulmate, right? And then, like, they also committed infidelity, right, to their own soulmate. So that's a two-faced kind of misinformation. It hurts not only their own soulmate, but this other soulmate pair. And that's a kind of a, right, but they lie and they put that out there. And then I would also say in terms of like, so that's a misinformation kind of thing. And then a clarification on like the providing of information about like legacy, so to speak. So like where the 1 mile unit came from. Something analogous in terms of like humans these days, or may or may not be analogous, is like what's called surname shaming. So like a surname for a family might have been documented for like 1,000 or 2,000 years, right? And then a woman is like, you know what? I'm going to forge my own DNA results and then say this surname is not what everything shows it is, right? It's a way of them disrespecting their own surname and shaming their own surname because they don't want to keep it. They want the surname of their significant other when they get married, which is pretty common. Like I would say like of that type of woman, that's like what that type of woman, 90% of that type actually do something like that before they take their husband's or significant other's surname. So it's sometimes it's really personally motivated, right? It's about disrespecting their family because they want to leave the family. Okay, but I don't think the author is doing that, right? I think it's just incomplete. Okay, I don't think the author is like a bad human being. I'm not making that assumption. It doesn't come across that way, at least not yet, anyway. So yeah, those are my notes from today. Have a day.